Hi, I'm Tammy Potter, and welcome to the Pregnancy Process Podcast, a show designed to help you navigate the hugely transformative journey to motherhood, where you'll hear the unique experience of experts in this area and the incredible stories of women sharing their conception, pregnancy, and postnatal journeys so that you can have a healthier, more informed pregnancy. In today's episode, I talk to Dr. Sarah Schubert and Stacey McMullen. Sarah is a clinical psychologist, trauma therapist, EMDR specialist, and leading expert in polyvagal theory. Stacey is a clinical psychologist, Indigenous Scholar, and PhD candidate focusing on perinatal EMDR intervention. What if the foundations of your baby's well-being and your own experience as a parent are shaped by patterns in your nervous system you might not even be aware of? In this episode, we explore how polyvagal theory helps us understand the nervous system's crucial role through pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period, and why this matters for you and your baby. Dr. Sarah Schubert and Stacey share real-life stories and practical insights about how nervous system health influences co-regulation, attachment, and even the legacy we pass on to future generations. Together, we discuss why healing begins with you and how understanding your own nervous system can help break cycles of trauma and build resilience for you and your family. Whether you're expecting, new to parenting, or simply curious about the mind-body connection, this episode will empower you with knowledge and tools to foster safety, healing, and a strong foundation for your child's development. Sarah, Stacey, thank you so much for your time today. It's fantastic to have you here with us. I'm really looking forward to this conversation as it touches on an area that I've got so much interest, not only professional interest, but personal interest around as well. And I know, Sarah, that you work in EMDR, and just from my own personal experience, I couldn't say any more positive things about that. And I will just give it a little plug now for anybody that's interested in EMDR. It's been absolutely life-changing for me. So thank you for the work that you do in that space. But this episode is not actually about EMDR at all. We're going to be talking about polyvagal theory in pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. So for listeners who are new to this concept, can you explain what polyvagal theory is and why is it particularly relevant to pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period?
Polyvagal theory, the way that I found myself learning about it and the relevance of it in my work is how it relates to trauma, which is where EMDR comes in as well. But polyvagal theory is the science of connection and regulation. It's the science of safety, and in the same breath, it's the science of threat and disconnection, aloneness. So polyvagal theory offers this understanding and evolutionary style roadmap into understanding the foundation of who we are as humans from the nervous system up. So polyvagal theory was never really meant to be a theory. I know Stephen Porges didn't set out to make a theory. He was just working in the field of obstetrics and neonatal care and noticed that in the same breath, the ventral or the vagal nerve could be a sign of health, and also the vagus nerve itself could actually lead to such low heart rate that it causes death in preterm infants. So the study of the paradox of the vagal nerve in the neonatal care setting led Stephen Porges to propose a theory of polyvagal theory, meaning that there's two pathways to our vagus nerve. But polyvagal theory, it describes the relationship between the foundation of who we are from our autonomic nervous system and the way we are in the world in relation to ourselves, others, and the world itself. So the autonomic nervous system is the foundation of polyvagal theory. We all have one. And it has evolved in this hierarchical fashion that we have like a dorsal vagal, a sympathetic, and a ventral vagal branch. And at any point in our life, from the moment I think when we're conceived our autonomic nervous system develops throughout pregnancy, and the ventral vagal nervous system then develops into that first year of life in a really significant way. But at any point in time in our life, we are somewhere in our nervous system. And wherever we are in our nervous system will influence how we perceive ourselves, others, and how we move through the world from moment to moment. I think what's really interesting is that we have these three nervous system states that gives us the complexity of how we feel, behave, respond, move, interact, see ourselves, the foundation of health and pathology. So these three parts of our nervous system creates these different neural platforms, and we know these neural platforms such as things like fight, flight, freeze, shutdown, social engagement, play, intimacy. So our nervous system will create all these different states. And from these states, we experience the world and others in very different ways. I think what's really interesting is that polyvagal theory can be so complex, like in the way Stephen Porges studies it in an academic sense. I can't understand half of it. Like it's really psychobiological in terms of the formation of the theory. But so many people in our field of trauma, which is how I've come to learn about polyvagal theory. So the big names like Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, Pat Ogden, they took Stephen Porges' work when he presented it in around 2010 or 11 and applied that to the field of trauma. And people like Deb Dana have taken the knowledge and wisdom from an academic sense, scientific sense, and has made it a theory with useful language that we can apply in clinical settings to human beings across the lifespan, right down from the moment we conceived, birth, and beyond. But the theory itself, the foundation of it is that we all have a nervous system. It's developed in a hierarchical fashion. And at any point in time, our nervous system is working in a way where we neuroceptively picking up on what's in our world and what's happening between us and other human beings, and how that is also impacting our internal state. The one premise I think we're going to bring to this podcast is that neuroception will impact the way humans of any age will move towards and away from other human beings, in the sense that our nervous system, through neuroception, is always working to keep us alive. So we're always making judgment, no matter how old we are, as to whether someone is threatening or safe. If we dysregulate, one of the premises in polyvagal theory is co-regulation, which will come into our discussion today. So human beings are wired biologically to connect to survive. When we're born, our social engagement system is online, and we're born wired to meet someone to look after us. And if that person's not there as a human being, we will die. So we're wired to connect. The interesting thing is that when we're born, we know how to dysregulate to get our needs met, but our ventral vagal nervous system's not yet developed in a way where we know how to downregulate. So co-regulation is this amazing premise that we'll bring into hopefully our discussion today, because co-regulation is the way our nervous system, mind, brain, and body forms in order to be the foundation of health and resilience. So I might just stop it there, Stacey, and I'll take a breath. That's a lot of dense theory quickly to start with. And how does it relate to the perinatal space?
Thank you, Sarah. That was incredible. I guess I've been working in the field of trauma for over 20 years now. I'm actually an Aboriginal woman and clinical psychologist, and fell into the space of working within the perinatal space through personal experiences.
So in terms of, because we've mentioned some really interesting things there, and I didn't actually know that polyvagal theory started in the obstetric space. So I just think that's incredible. So there's this massive theory that's really impacted how clinicians work, how we understand ourselves. And it's really, there's definitely, you've mentioned some names there, Bessel van der Kolk. They're really bringing it into a more known space through their work. And I just think it's amazing that it started in the obstetric space. So that's really cool. Now, you did mention dorsal vagal, ventral vagal, and sympathetic, which are the autonomic nervous system states. But can you just explain to us how the autonomic nervous system, as described by polyvagal theory, shape our experiences of safety, connection, and threat during these stages?
Our nervous system, the ventral vagal branch of our nervous system, which kind of comes from the brainstem, and the ventral vagal branch of our nervous system wanders all the way through the body, but particularly the ventral vagal influence is its influence anything above the diaphragm. So the ventral vagal state is a parasympathetic branch of our nervous system that when we rest in that, when it's on and developed and toned, that is our nervous system state where we get restoration, growth, development, and healing. From that state, when we sit in a ventral vagal state, our defenses are off, which means that we can sit in that state in a place where we view the world and ourselves and others as I'm okay. The world is okay. People are safe. I'm safe. So we have this lens through which we can connect to ourselves in kind of an authentic way. And in this state, our social engagement system is on. So we are open to receiving connection from others and giving that in a way that's actually not threatening. But our nervous system is always scanning our environment, inside, outside, and in between. So our nervous system will almost act like a lighthouse at any age to scan for safety and threat. If our nervous system responds in a way that we feel safe, the ventral vagal branch of our nervous system's on, and we're in a state of homeostatic balance where we can grow. If our little nervous systems scan our environment and see cues of threat or harm or danger, the sympathetic branch of our nervous system will be our first point of protection and defense. So our nervous system will always work in service of survival. It's always scanning our environment for threat and will shift into protective states. And the sympathetic branch of our nervous system, which I think sits around 400 million years old, that branch will come on, and it's the fight and flight sympathetic response. So it's the part of our nervous system that we can feel ourselves jump into a state of, oh my God, I've got to fight here or run. That's really useful when we're adults. Yeah. But if we think about an infant or children who can't flee, who can't run, who can't get away from caregivers because of their size or age, we have another branch of our nervous system, which is the dorsal vagal branch, which is the very old 500 million year old system we see in reptiles, where if we sense threat and we can't run or fight, which is what we see in infants, the only way to survive is to shut down. So the dorsal vagal nervous system will pull on like a parasympathetic brake that just takes us into hiding away. It's almost like a tortoise hiding in a shell. I'm just going to disappear in order to survive. In children, we see the dorsal vagal branch come online when there's no hope to use a sympathetic response for survival. So a sympathetic response is when we see threat and we go, I've got hope here. I can fight. I can run. This ain't fair. I'm going to do something about it. When we're so little and when we're kids and children, particularly infants, that's not an option for us. So the only way to survive, our nervous system shuts us down. And it's when we sense hopelessness or despair or aloneness. There's no one here to protect me. There's no one, I can't fight back. I can't run. The only way to survive is just to disappear. And from that nervous system state, It's one of despair, hopelessness, aloneness, but everything shuts down in order to survive. It can actually look like a calm infant, or it can look like calm, but in the background, the sympathetic nervous system is running high too.
It's so incredible. It's that dorsal vagal state, how people can appear calm in that. It's always quite fascinated me. It's like they're so shut down that looking at them, you would think that they were calm, but really they've just removed themselves, I guess. It's like they're in third person back here. But let's move into the whole pregnancy area now and the maternal nervous system and fetal development. I think let's start with something that I've heard called the womb print. And this kind of talks about how a mother's automatic state, e.g., calm versus survival mode, and hopefully not shut down, but how their state during pregnancy actually shapes the baby's neurological and emotional development, but particularly through concepts like the womb print, which is what that talks about.
During pregnancy, we know that high levels of stress in mothers, and stress is related to a world not feeling safe. Stress can be trauma, it can be adverse life experience, it can be constant activation of unhealed trauma. So stress in pregnancy will, like stress in any time of life, will activate the amygdala, it'll fire, and that will release certain chemicals and hormones like cortisol, which does actually impact fetal development in terms of the development of the nervous system, brain development. And we also, I know there's research to show that mothers with high levels of stress during pregnancy are more likely to go into childbirth more preterm, and fetal size, bub size is smaller with high levels of cortisol. Is that your understanding as well, Stacey?
There's been a number of research studies around stress in pregnancy and lower birth weight and preterm birth as well. And also the outcomes of that birthing process. We're talking about mums who may actually not have as smooth a birthing process as they hope as well because of experiencing that stress on going through pregnancy.
In terms of shaping the baby's neurological and emotional development, how does that shape it? Because as the baby's developing in the womb, it's developing its nervous system. So the womb print talks about the baby being in the womb, picking up on signals from the mother through hormones like adrenaline, cortisol, that type of thing, and picking up on that emotional state and those hormonal cues that the baby's getting, and the nervous system developing in the baby and figuring out, am I coming out into a world that's safe or am I coming out into a world that's chaotic, and how that can actually have a neurological impact on the baby. Are we able to talk to that?
We can't actually study the infant's nervous system until they're here. So I think what we know about development and the impact of cortisol, we know a lot about the long-term health implications of the impact of cortisol on the developing mind, brain, body, and nervous system. But what we see when bubs are born is that there is an increased stress sensitivity. So it's like the research that's done on infants that are just less than a month old. When there is mums with high levels of stress or unhealed trauma, bubs will have an amygdala that fires at an increased rate compared to bubs who come from a control conditions where mums aren't experiencing high levels of stress. And I also know of research that shows not only is the amygdala and the alarm center of the brain on more for these bubs immediately coming into the world, it's almost like they have this increased sensitivity to threat. I think in the still face experiments, when mums and bubs are attuned to each other and mum will turn away, stress levels in infants will go up. But bubs who are in a kind of a research condition where mums have got high levels of stress or mums that don't, the bubs in the condition where mums experience high levels of stress, their nervous system will take longer to come back down to a state of calm. So it's almost like their nervous systems have increased stress sensitivity from the moment they enter the world. And regulation and resiliency is defined as how quickly we go into those defensive protective states and then come back down to a state of okayness. So yeah, there is, right from the moment we enter the world, a kind of dysregulation in the nervous system and the amygdala firing too much and then not able to regulate down. So things like the synchrony in their attuned behaviour will be impacted the moment they come into the world. And then there's a whole gamut of ramifications from lack of synchrony due to high levels of stress or unhealed trauma. In our field, when we see high levels of stress and overactivation of the amygdala, in a trauma sense, that is often the reason mums have high levels of stress or overactivation of the amygdala is often due to their own unhealed trauma, which is continually being activated over and over again. So it's not just like the practical stresses that mums experience in pregnancy that have an impact on the developing fetus and bub. It is those experiences of things like violence or abuse or just daily life stresses of being a woman working in this Western individualistic world. But it's actually those daily stresses in addition to unhealed trauma. And unhealed trauma can just be a lifetime of not having her needs met, a lifetime of feeling alone, a lifetime of feeling unheard, invisible, a lifetime of unhealed trauma that is what we know as a traditional sense of big T traumatic events and abuse and domestic violence and so forth. But it's a women's nervous system that experiences stress every single time one of those traumas that are unhealed get activated. So it's almost like when mum's own sensitivity to stress is activated over and over again because of their unhealed trauma, it's that impact on bub that I think we see in a really significant way, that we often talk about that in the sense of intergenerational trauma. So the cortisol levels, the stress hormones, the unmyelination of the DNA, like that, the epigenetics, like that trauma imprint on mum is passed on to bub right from the moment we conceived and even before.
So interesting, isn't it? And that whole space, pregnancy itself is like a low-level activation of potentially all these unhealed traumas that women are dealing with. You've got so many changes going on in a woman in your life during pregnancy, or for physical, mental, emotional. You've got relational changes. You've got changes at work. Your home environment's potential, it is changing. Your body's changing. And not only that, you're thinking about becoming a parent. So then all of these thoughts about how you were parented, your relationship with your own parents, your mother, your father, what that was like, it's all kind of bubbling away under the surface. And I think sadly this is where the high rates of perinatal anxiety and depression come up, because especially for women that haven't done the work, as it's called, look at this stuff before they fall pregnant. It's bubbling away underneath the surface, and they might actually have no idea that's what's causing the stress and the anxiety, and they're just putting it down to those kind of external and slightly internal factors with the physical changes, but all of the changes that they're going through, and they don't actually realize that the anxiety and depression is got a lot more to do with this other stuff over here that's maybe being pushed down under the surface. But I guess that does open the door, and you've opened the door to it previously as well, and that's on the intergenerational trauma pathways. So everyone smiles all at once. So can we actually talk about how this untreated maternal trauma becomes biologically embedded in the baby, potentially creating cycles of dysregulation and intergenerational trauma across the generations? Can we talk about that?
I would love to jump in here, Sarah. This is where I would make the comment that so every woman coming into this space coming into conception, pregnancy, birthing, parenting, we have our own story of our own life, but we actually have the stories of generations before us. We hold that. So, me as an Aboriginal woman, I come in with thousands of years of story. Now, that can be thousands of years of trauma, marginalisation, systemic issues, all the legacies of colonisation. But I also come in with thousands of years of resilience too. So I'm always aware to hold space for both of those. But if we think about our mums, and I work a lot with Aboriginal mums and Aboriginal mums to be, and if we think about even the element of being pregnant, we are going to services even the very location of that service, going to see a health professional who, let's face it, health professionals have done a lot of damage historically. Even that is enough to activate that stress. We don't even have to walk in the door and we're already activated. And then having a health professional potentially checking us over, making judgments, or making comments about our birth, and then really coming from this place of the health professional being a perceived authority figure. And we know what that's done to us historically. So, the very nature of perinatal services is enough to provide that ongoing activation that's enough to really imprint our next generation. Even if birthing goes well, we already have those things happening that are in potentially constant states of fear, trauma, and also many children have been removed straight from hospital. So that overwhelming fear of, when I have bub, is everything going to be okay? Am I going to be able to keep bub? All of those things, even if cognitively women know that, I'm doing all the right things, I'm okay, there's the legacies of that unprocessed trauma that exists within all of these generations for women we see. And there is some reality too at times we do feel like we are potentially having to prove ourselves in that space. I'd love to say racism doesn't exist in healthcare settings, but it still unfortunately does. So there is that constant activation, and that's even if things are going well. And then throw into the fact birth, pregnancy, even breastfeeding, all those elements, they're really intimate things, really intimate events, but all of them kind of involve other people around us as well. And that can be great because it can serve as a source of connection, but it can also, if that connection's not feeling safe, it can have an incredibly difficult impact and again activate and provide that opportunity for even greater trauma. So we often get a lot of women I see have then additional experiences of trauma on top of what they already went in with. And in saying that, it's not all doom and gloom. There are opportunities for healing. That's why I love the perinatal space.
Can we talk about how it might imprint and get biologically embedded in the baby itself? Like how a woman's untreated trauma would become biologically embedded in the baby that would then create the cycles of dysregulation across the generations?
I'm struggling in the womb because I think what we know most about, and what we can speak most to, is how trauma becomes embedded from mum to bub through the attachment system, which begins in the womb. But from the moment bub enters the world, there are different ways that a mum who has unhealed trauma will attune to, attach, respond, display different levels of attuned emotional regulation from the moment bub enters the world. And a mother with unhealed trauma, generations of trauma, will find certain things like a new bub crying more distressing and lead to her own different nervous system response. So it's that, I think what comes to mind, it's the attachment that then will imprint on the bub a way of the bub seeing themselves as a bub that can get their needs met, a bub that's seen, a bub that can be regulated, or they will learn very quickly that I won't get my needs met, I'm not loved, I don't matter. So it's that, it's the connection in the womb, but I think the imprint, the biological imprint, the neurobiological, the nervous system imprint really happens when that attachment system comes online the minute bub enters the world. And then you can start looking at the bub's own nervous system response and the level of dysregulation and distress. And I think the biological imprint comes from, and this is where polyvagal comes in, it's like when bub enters the world, the one job we have as a parent is to co-regulate the distress to build up and develop the ventral vagal state, which is where healing, growth, and restoration happens. But unhealed trauma leads to misattunement, a lack of synchrony. And we know that healthy synchrony and attunement, interpersonal connectedness that is responsive, that in and of itself can lead to mum and bub synchronizing at every level within milliseconds. So if we have a healthy mum that's attuned and healed from her trauma or hasn't experienced high levels of it, we have a mum that can meet the needs of bub, and through a smile, through play, through attunement, mum's brain waves, mum's heartbeat, mum's endocrine stress systems will be matched by bub within milliseconds. We know that from research from bubs that are like a month old, 2 months old, 3 months old. But then what happens when mum's traumatized and doesn't have that ventral vagal state? We have an infant then that has no capacity to downregulate. And we have a biological imprint that looks like a child living in protective, defensive, sympathetic, and dorsal states. So you'll then have a bub that is moving through the world with a dysregulated nervous system that's not developing. And that dysregulation in the nervous system will impact mind, brain, body at every single level of development. So not just in the psychological way that bub then learns that my caregiver is not there for me. My source of love is also my source of threat. I'm alone in the world. I can't get my needs met. But the high levels of dysregulation in the nervous system will impact their immune system, their growth, their development physiologically, but also neurobiologically too. We know that children who grow in environments of neglect and lack of attunement, their brains look different. Their prefrontal cortex is smaller. You'll have dysregulation that looks like kids who can't concentrate, who can't take in information, who can't learn, who can't socialize, who, if you don't have a ventral vagal state that's developing, you can't move through the world in a state of connection. And if you can't connect in a healthy way, you can't regulate and you can't get any adaptive information that I'm okay, the world's okay, and people are okay. So you move through the world in states of sympathetic and dorsal. And that's where dysregulation, physical health, mental health, struggles in every area of development, cognitive, academic, you'll see the impact of unhealed trauma from the minute a child enters the world that will be lasting lifelong through their lifespan. We know from ACE's research that unhealed trauma and trauma that's formed in childhood that often comes through the lack of secure attachment, if we have kids forming an insecure or disorganized attachment with bub, we know what that leads to trajectory-wise in terms of physical, mental health across the lifespan. It's so hard to capsulate because when we think about the impact, it just goes beyond to every area of development that we see working in the field that we work in, the field of trauma. And trauma is not just PTSD. Trauma is separation anxiety, medical trauma. It's like trauma is much more than just what we know as like bad things happening to me.
Let's talk about that a little bit, if that's okay. So can we talk about what we call big T trauma and little t traumas and how they differentially impact a mother's nervous system and why those kind of chronic or subtle stresses can be damaging to her ability to co-regulate with her infant. But before we go into that, I just want to take a side step.
It's the nature of this discussion.
I know, it is so interesting. And I've heard that our own births is actually imprinted into our subconscious. And that, yeah, whether that's true or not, I can't remember exactly where I heard that from. But I think that's so interesting that our own births are imprinted on our subconscious, and that even can impact our own feelings about birthing ourselves.
I think when we're talking about subconscious, we're talking about implicit memory. It's like the amount of times that we do trauma memory processing and people go back and recall their own birth in some way. And it's not a visual memory that we have, but it's a somatic implicit memory. But there is not a client in my caseload where I haven't asked about birth and what it was like. The way we entered the world, whether it's, I don't know how you class, I can't use that word normal in pregnancy and birth, but if we enter the world before our nervous system forms, like if we come into the world and we're not ready to be there yet because our nervous system's not developed yet, so pre-32 weeks, we don't have a ventral vagal state. So we're coming into the world purely in sympathetic states. If we have a distressing birth, if we get stuck, if we can't get out, that the stress on bub, I think, is imprinted in an implicit somatic memory that if we think about distressing births or preterm births, what happens is we generally spend time in like neonatal care, in environments where we often can't be picked up and held and co-regulated through synchrony and attunement. We come into the world in a Western hospitalised setting where there's a lot of lights and there's a lot of beeping and there's people poking and prodding, and we go into quite a shutdown state. But I think kids who have distressing traumatic birth experiences and spend time in NICU, that will impact them on every level.
So let's move back, because I know I hijacked that question previously. So can we go back to big T and little t traumas and how they impact a mother's nervous system, and why might chronic or even subtle stresses be equally damaging to her ability to co-regulate with her baby? Let's talk about that, because that's going into that kind of attachment realm now.
Do you want to start with this one, Stacey? I feel like I could hijack this for days.
If I think about big T's and little t, for me, I see a lot of traumas of omission, what a woman hasn't got in her life. She hasn't had a sense of feeling unconditionally loved or good enough or accepted or important. And that felt sense of safety, that felt sense of somebody's got my back, everything will be okay. And the impact of that, and even if I think about intergenerational trauma as well, thinking about what it's like to not feel included in society, to not feel that your cultural ways of doing things are because we're in these Western systems, that imprints on a woman's sense of, am I good enough? Am I important? Do I matter? And those are the things that are incredibly painful. And they're the things in my clinical work that I find are the things we spend lots of time working on, rather than any kind of big T trauma that's happened. It's that real deep attachment, painful, cutting to the core of who I am because of things that haven't been met.
And I would put it out there really clearly, is that big T traumas and small t traumas don't have an equal impact. Big T traumas don't impact us anywhere near as much as small t traumas. And so if we think about small t traumas as a woman, and particularly marginalised women even more so, is that we get the message that we're lesser, we're not good enough, we're not seen, not heard, not valued. We're holding high levels of stress because we're also seen as responsible for many things, and now we have dual roles that we have to do equally as well in terms of work and career. And even when you speak up, you're then judged as being problematic. But if you don't speak up, then we can't win. It's almost like the traumas of omission are the things where we haven't had our needs met when we've needed it. And we often are unseen as kids. Being bullied at school was invalidated. Oh, that's just what girls do. Traumas of omission lead us to live in a state where we're constantly trying to be seen as being okay, which means we're not okay as who we are. So we're constantly working hard. We're overachieving. We are perfectionists. We're have these unrelenting standards. So in order to feel okay in the world, our nervous system is just so much more on because we're working to be seen as equal when we're not. That's societal, isn't it? But if we're working with traumas, if we're thinking about mums who have trauma coming into the birthing period or the perinatal space, I'm thinking of women who have been sexually assaulted and sexually abused. And if that's unhealed, that is going to be activated by the birthing process and the medicalised intervention. But what is it about the sexual trauma that's so traumatic? I don't work a lot with processing big T traumas. What I work a lot with processing and healing from is the fact that I wasn't protected. I was alone. I told someone and they didn't believe me. It went to court. It was found not guilty. So the trauma of a big T event, it's not the big T event that's traumatic for women or people in general. It's not having my needs met when something like that happened. And that has a lasting imprint on our sense of self, on our sense of being in the world, on our nervous systems. And it's actually, I think, the traumas of omission, this is what we see being activated during pregnancy in the perinatal period. Because if you think about what happens after birth, we can't go to the gym, we can't work, we can't do all those things that give us a sense of being okay in the world. We're actually quite isolated and alone with Bub in that space where it's now just me in the world and I can't do all these other things to make me feel like I matter in some way. So everything that we normally would do to regulate our nervous system is almost taken from us. And it's just us. And it's that aloneness and not being supported, not being seen, not being held in mind. That, I think, is a really wounding, damaging thing that gets highlighted in that postnatal period when we're in recovery and there's no one there for us.
And how does that impact her ability to co-regulate with her infant? If that's what mums are feeling, how does that co-regulation that you were talking about before, which is so important?
I'm willing to share my own experience here. What it activated for me was, first of all, my own traumas of omission in childhood. First of all, it's, oh my God, I can see how tiny I was. How come I wasn't loved and cared for? Why wasn't I cared for like this by my mum? But I think what activates during that period is that you have this little creature, this brand new beautiful baby that needs their needs to be met. And I think over time what we see is that I now have to meet the needs of this child, and I want to, because I want to be the mum that I never got when I was that age. But at the same time, it's activating my traumas of omission, going, you need your needs to be met. What about me? I don't have my needs met. And it's dysregulating in a disproportionate way. So it impacts and it activates our aloneness in that space, which is, I'm overwhelmed here and there's no one there to see me, hold me and be there. And that's my experience of childhood as well. It's like when I was overwhelmed in childhood, there was no one there to attune to me, to regulate me down. And again, I'm a bit like you, Tammy. I did a lot of work before I went in and had kids. But, mate, I realised after having children, the level of trauma of omission that I hadn't actually healed from. So I think our first children get like the unhealed version of us and send us to therapy. And what happens is that these unhealed traumas become activated. Our amygdala fires. We go into protective states. And in a polyvagal sense, if you're sympathetic and you're dorsal and you lose a footing in ventral, your social engagement system's gone. And how are you meant to regulate that dysregulated baby if you're not regulated yourself? You need to be able to keep one foot in ventral. Your job as a parent, I remember in a polyvagal sense hearing, your job as a parent is to stay calmer than them. But if you have unhealed trauma, you lose that footing in ventral, you get sucked into your trauma narrative. And if you have no footing in ventral, you cannot regulate your bub back to a ventral state. You're just both spinning in these sympathetic or dorsal states of distress or shutdown.
Let's go into that a little bit further, if that's okay. So if a mother's nervous system is stuck in that survival mode, how does that mismatch affect her baby's capacity and emerging capacity for self-regulation and secure attachment?
I think if you have, and we see this all the time in therapy, if you have a mum that doesn't have the capacity or a ventral state, maybe mum hasn't developed a ventral capacity because they haven't had a parent who's developed a ventral capacity. So if you have a mum that's living in survival states, you will also have an infant whose autonomic nervous system is also undeveloped in a ventral state. So as a parent, we are building the brains and nervous systems of our infants and children. If you don't have a ventral state, you can't develop theirs. So in polyvagal theory, co-regulation is bidirectional. And so if you think about bringing a new bub into the world, and in the middle of the night, you're trying to regulate that bub down, you have to keep one footing in ventral to be able to do that. And if you're rocking bub, synchrony and attunement will mean that if you can keep one footing out of those protective states, you can be stressed or totally exhausted and tipping into like total hopelessness and despair. But if you can keep one footing in ventral, you will pull bub's nervous system into ventral too. And then the bidirectional nature of that is when bub starts to calm, you're going to start to calm too. So you will have an attachment system where there is co-regulation, but it starts with you as a parent. Like you've got to have that ventral vagal footing. If you lose that, I'm lucky, I do have a partner. If I lose that, I'll just hand it over to my partner. And then if he's ventral, but there's a lot of mums out there where there's no one to hand bub to. And I think living in our Western individualistic worlds, our family systems would normally step in if we can't do that as a mum. But if you have a parent with no ventral state and a primary caregiving system with no ventral state, you will have an infant that will not develop theirs. And that means there's a high level of dysregulation and limited resilience moving through life. And we know that with no ventral state, you will be living in survival states, which means you have no energy or capacity to develop a sense of self that you're actually okay in the world and you're loved and cared for. So without a ventral nervous system developing, that is the foundation of an insecure or disorganized attachment, but it is a trajectory for lifelong physical and mental health impact in all domains of development: social, emotional, cognitive, physical, immune system, you name it. But we know mums that have trauma histories that are unhealed. There is a correlation between unhealed trauma and disorganized attachment, and the trajectory of disorganized attachment is significant mental and physical issues lifelong, all areas of labels and diagnoses.
I find all this stuff so interesting. And then obviously moving into the birth as well, because how a mother perceives safety or threat during labor absolutely influence the hormonal physiology. And we know that birth is a hormonal response. Sure, it's like a physical, emotional, hormonal response, and that we need the mum to feel safe in order for that pattern to flow correctly. And if it's interrupted in any capacity and the mum suddenly feels unsafe, because obviously we're ancient beings, right? So if we're giving birth out in the field where women used to give birth, and there was, it's true, and there was a threat that came up, labor would stall so they could move themselves to safety. Now, our brains are still wired, our hormones are still wired for primal experiences, but we're not in primal anymore. We're in the modern world. But those same safety switches, I suppose, or threat switches can turn on. But how can that influence the baby's transition to life outside of the womb? Because obviously, you know, birth trauma, it happens. If you look at the statistics, they're scarily high. So if someone has had a traumatic birth or a high intervention delivery, that does disrupt that mother-infant co-regulation loop.
Yeah.
What kind of polyvagal informed strategies can help repair and support healthy co-regulation moving forwards?
I would add 2 interventions to this, because I think a traumatic birth is traumatic, or most births are traumatic in some way, as natural as they are. But I think polyvagal informed interventions are beautiful in terms of creating the co-regulation, in terms of encouraging play, encouraging vulnerability and capacity just to be with your child as opposed to doing motherhood. So I think polyvagal interventions are one level of capturing those beautiful attuned moments, like capturing the glimmers, capturing states of play, getting to know your nervous system as a mum and knowing what ventral feels like, and using bub to nurture your state of being in a place where you feel safe and okay and connected and playful and fun. Childhood and infancy can bring that ventral vagal state out. But a polyvagal intervention isn't enough to heal birth trauma. I think polyvagal interventions sit in what we know as phase 1 of like trauma-focused treatments that are evidence-based and effective. So if we have traumatic events or negative life events or threatening events that have embedded as trauma and have resulted in memory of an experience being dysfunctionally stored, and that memory is so overwhelming that every time your brain tries to process that experience, the amygdala fires and it can't make sense of that birth experience or traumatic experience or life-threatening experience. Memories or trauma that has embedded requires a level of memory reprocessing in its treatment. And we know that evidence-based treatments like EMDR that involve memory processing, we use polyvagal interventions in the preparation phase, but it is actually the processing of the memory of that birth trauma, mind, brain, and body, that will lead to healing, so that that memory of the event is put to where it's meant to be. We've made sense of it as something that is now my story. It's part of my story. It's part of who I am. But the healing of that memory will lead to post-traumatic healing and growth. But in terms of thinking of like polyvagal is the intervention before and even in the integration, but in terms of healing from birth trauma and being able to face birth again, I had an insight, like a light bulb moment here, which is just almost like we use evidence-based interventions to process trauma, and they're things like EMDR and trauma-focused CBT. Those interventions will not work if we don't wrap around those interventions, not just things like polyvagal theory. And polyvagal theory is the science of attachment. It's the science of regulation and attachment. But into that intervention, like we're creating co-regulation, we're creating secure attachment. But as we heal mum in a sense of creating a co-regulating community that's healthy around her, we're doing that through almost an interpersonal attachment lens, where we're doing that so that she can attune to bub. And we know that the trauma-focused interventions we bring in will heal the memory and the implicit memory as well. We know these days it also changes the structure and functioning of mum's brain. It changes the nervous system. We know now more recently that EMDR actually changes the very myelination of DNA when it's effective. So in a sense is also stopping the intergenerational epigenetic transfer of trauma, intergenerational trauma. But the healing of mum starts with that co-regulation of a community of healthy attachment. And when mum can ground in herself, that will play out in the sense that now I can attend my bub and build that nervous system too. So it's like healing mum, healing the trauma, which will then lead to the integration of all of that in terms of a secure attachment, which will lead to, you know, lifelong positive trajectories for that child and generations beyond. Every moment of ventral that we can give our clients in any intervention, it means that human being is now a regulated, ventral, kind, socially engaged human being on the planet. That will impact every interaction that bub will have moving through the world itself. Yeah.
And I can personally attest to how incredible EMDR is. Like I said at the beginning, can't say any more positive things about it. But let's talk about when mothers experience that kind of range of nervous system dysregulation that can happen in the postpartum period, from feeling touched out, or that's a big one, emotionally numb. That's another one. You know, they can't connect to their baby, all the way through to those kind of intense mum rage episodes when their needs continually go unmet. Like, how do these states affect a mother's ability to connect with her children? And again, what kind of practices can restore the balance?
Do you have a starting point in mind here, Stacey?
In terms of practices, again, I come back to some of those co-regulation, connection, those opportunities. If you are tapped out and touched out, having that network around you who can provide the practical support without judgment, and can also help with some of that co-regulation and that trust in that connection of people. You know, I am a single mum, but I've got an amazing community around me of family and other people I consider family, and I rely on them quite a lot to help and step in the space and support me and my kids. I think it is that element of, if you are reaching those stages, it's that inability to step out of what's happening for me in the moment and attune to what my child needs.
Which is hard if you're reliving
It's
trauma stories that get activated
absolutely.
over again. And I think that's part of therapy. That's part of, and if we think about attachment interventions like circle of security, for example, or in infant mental health, we're working on mum's ability to heal her own triggers. And oh my God, parenting is the most beautiful yet triggering and traumatizing, re-traumatizing developments that we go through. And we know that parenting is another stage of human development because it is activating our unhealed stories over and over and over again. And I think if we are constantly being activated and pulled into our stories of our needs not being met, of our fear, you know, how many times you see mums where their own child reminds them of an abusive perpetrating partner who's, you know, in jail or something now. Like, if we don't recognize those triggers, and those triggers are not happening in a conscious way a lot of the time, we are neuroceptively, in a polyvagal sense, picking up on something we perceive as traumatizing, and our neuroception will respond to unhealed trauma memories, and those unhealed trauma memories will be activating our nervous system into states of protection and defense, even in an environment which is safe. So an environment that reminds us of past times in our life that have been threatening, frightening, scary, invalidating. The trauma stories that are unhealed will constantly be activated, but you might not be aware of why you're having this disproportionate response to your child knocking over a cup of water. It's like, so we have to listen to ourselves and be brave enough to go into the healing space where we can look at ourselves and what we bring to that that parenting space, that attachment space, and what it is that we're doing in those activated states that then send our child into protective, defensive, sympathetic shutdown states too. Our nervous systems are, again, bidirectional. How we respond is neuroceptively picked up on by our little kids, who then go into sympathetic state, and then we get more activated and they get more activated. The only way to heal that disproportionate trigger is to go in and do our own work. And you've done, we've all gone in there, and it's not easy. But if we're not going to do our own work, I think the next step is, well, we're going to have to go in and do work with our kids. And I've done that, and that's even more terrifying than individual work.
When there are messages like, you've got cultural messages out there, like good mothers sacrifice themselves. And so many of those types of messages, mums come last. Some pets come before the mums, right? So
Yeah.
these messages often override a mum's needs, right? So how do these narratives keep mums stuck in those sympathetic activation, and what kind of changes could we implement or promote that would help mums move more into those ventral vagal states?
If you are not regulated, if you are not well, you can't take care of anyone. I would listen to flight attendants and put your own oxygen mask on first, is what we need to be doing. But we live in a world where I think as mums, we constantly perceive these messages that we're not doing it right. Your lunches aren't healthy enough. Your muffins have got too much sugar in them. Your kid's not dressed up well enough. You got red nose day, sock day. Like, you're constantly being bombarded with messages that we've got to do more and be more and provide more and give more. And I hear that, Tammy, like, I resonate to my core when you say that. And it just means that we're all, don't forget this medical appointment and this and that, and we're just constantly holding everything. Our level of sympathetic resting baseline is so high. It's so high. And that's not good, because we're teaching our kids, like, they're watching us and they're learning from us and they're feeling us. And we're creating a generation that's also so busy and it's got to do this and run sport. Like, it's almost like busyness is glorified, and it's not. And I think what we need to be doing as a culture is that we're all doing life, and none of us are actually being and spending time and playing and just actually creating moments of boredom and nothingness and being proud of that. Like, just literally being with your children. We will not have a generation with any creativity. We will not have a generation with any imagination. We will be creating these little sympathetic generations that have no idea how to relate, regulate, problem solve, draw, write beautiful stories. Like, that whole ventral vagal system is one where we can create and become and meet our full potential of our authentic self. And I think that's being lost.
It's interesting that you mentioned boredom, because I'm listening to Dopamine Nation at the moment. It's been on my kind of list of to listen to for a while. And that's something that they mention as well, is that actually being bored, and we fill our time with so many things, even just in general. You can't just, I don't know. I picked up on this myself because I'm the queen of multitasking, because I love listening to things while I'm doing things, right? So if I'm doing something, rather than just having silence in my brain and letting my brain wander, I listen to something. And even if I'm eating, I'm normally listening to something or reading something. And it's, no, you actually need to just be conscious and present with what you're actually doing, and give your brain the opportunity to wander and be a little bit bored, rather than just constantly like input. Yeah. So it's so interesting. But I just want to talk about how isolating modern parenting is, and how communities and healthcare systems can better provide that kind of more social nourishment required for nervous system health? Like, how can we go about building
I think
that?
it's great that you brought that up, because I think, and look, my last child was born in COVID, in the lockdown week. So I can really
Yeah.
resonate with this. I think the westernized systems that we have focus on this idea of we've got mum, we've got dad, and maybe, one other. And it really negates the fact that there is so much strength in connection. Let's include people, even in the birthing process. In Aboriginal women, birthing is part of community. There's also research that's actually, and there's only a couple of things out there that focuses on dads in the NICU space. We should be supporting dad to support mum, to support, and even health staff. I think if we start to focus on this messaging and having services that can actually be more inclusive, rather than having this kind of exclusion, we're only allowed this many people. And then how do we connect our mums during the pregnancy period? How do we do that better, where it's not something like, oh, we've got these groups, but sometimes mums fear engaging in those. How do we actually really promote and get these connections going as early as possible, rather than waiting until birth or after, and even talking about birthing? Because often we're not exposed to different stories. If we know, if we've got information that helps us make choices, that helps us feel safe, I think that connection and co-regulation is key. But I think health services, if we shifted from that westernized approach, that individualistic and more that collectivist, and actually have support services and perinatal services that look at how's family going with pregnancy? Who are your people? Even asking that question, who provides you support? Who do you go to when you need to feel safe? Who has taught you about being a mum? Who's shaped what your idea of being a mum is all about? Just asking those questions curiously, and then saying, how do you want to involve them? How do you want to connect to other women? How do you want to connect more broadly? I think that provides the opportunities. So just being curious and actually looking at the woman from their story and who they are, rather than we've got another mum coming in, how many people can we let in the room?
I mean, there's certainly a reason why the number one video on my YouTube channel is about pregnancy loneliness, which is a little bit sad, really. Yeah.
Honestly, I think aloneness is the one thing in our world that creates the most suffering. And I think if we can do I was just thinking the one book that Stephen Porges and his son Seth wrote is Our Polyvagal World. And the essence of that is, which is beautiful, because the forward is to Sue Carter, who gave us all of our knowledge on oxytocin. Like, what a powerhouse family, hey? Oxytocin and Polyvagal Theory, husband and wife team. But if we can implement anything into the medical field or the school or work or just the world in general, it's just creating connection, which is the antidote to loneliness. And loneliness creates so much suffering. But connection and safety. So finding out who people's safe, healthy connections are and having them around. The biggest factor in ongoing suffering in terms of people who fail treatment, people who drop out of treatment, people who relapse, is aloneness. If I look at every clinical case of mine where I'm struggling and they're not getting better, it's these people that are alone. And we have a world of disconnection, this individualistic Western society where we have to be more and do more and go to the gym more and work more. Like, it's all about isolation. And the focus, we need to look at Indigenous culture and wisdom and healing and connection and learn more about how we can heal through connection, but creating places of safety where our nervous system can be off and operate optimally in any environment, including the birthing environment and pregnancy, perinatal space.
And I think that really beautifully answers one of my kind of closing reflection questions. And I might just ask it. So I guess that building your community and minimizing loneliness, understanding who the people are that are around you that are going to be there for you and that you can lean on during this time. Would that be that one thing that if you could urge expectant parents to prioritize for their nervous system health, would that be what it is?
Partly.
Partly.
I was going to say partly it's not the entire answer for me. I think the other part is that building that sense of safety and slowing down to actually show up and be present. And that's the center of all connection. And that's the center of, I mean, Indigenous, Aboriginal social emotional well-being. It's all about centering around connection and relationality. And for me, that's the key. And it really, polyvagal theory, that's why I align so greatly with it. That's one thing we can do is just connect, slow down and show up and find safety.
Yeah. I think you nailed it, Stacey. It's the type of connection. It's not just being surrounded by people that are healthy, but it's the way we sit in that space. And it's not doing things with people, it's being with them. You can't fake ventral. You can't just show up and go, oh, likely to see you. Here's a bunch of bread and eat that and off you go. Here's some cooked dinners. Like, that's not safe and healthy, attuned, synchronous, healing, revitalizing connection. It's to build a world of safe, attuned others, but to be in that space. And being is that slowing down, it's honoring, it's being authentic. It's, I would say, as a new mum, take the opportunity to learn to play, to laugh, to have fun, to grab hold of that inner child that got lost for you years ago, if you have healed, and use that to heal. So be in your connections, but be fully in them. And that means showing up, being sad, being angry, being frustrated, but also most importantly, playing, having fun, joy, and just nurturing those connections in a way that is slow.
And if there was one thing you wish all women knew before they had a baby, what would that be?
Themselves. If you can get to know yourself,
You wish you did.
your nervous system, to I think for me, learning the fact that I matter and I have a nervous system. And I think for me, once you learn a theory like polyvagal theory and you learn the impact of trauma, you know that unhealed trauma will have such detrimental effects and you'll even die an early death. Like, knowing that is go get your own work done. You want to be there for as long as you can with your kids. But once you learn polyvagal theory and you feel it, you can't unfeel it. So learning that you are the foundations of building this little human's mind, brain, and body. I know that sounds like a lot of pressure, but it is. I think once you learn polyvagal theory, it gives you a new sense of responsibility in the world about how you are with any human being. My nervous system impacts yours and vice versa. So learn about yourself, meaning your body, your nervous system, your regulation, your story, your value, your worth, your connections.
That was such a beautiful, beautiful tip to end on. So I appreciate both of your time so much. And I feel like, yes, we have covered so much ground there and we've gone here, there, and everywhere. And there were some topics there that really could be their own podcasts. And I really appreciate you walking us through all of that, because it's such a big topic and it's really impactful. And I think just even opening this space, opening this conversation for people that are interested and want to learn and try and be the best mother and parents possible and make sure that they're not perpetuating that intergenerational trauma. I think, these conversations are so important. So I thank you both so much for your time and for what you do in your respective fields. So thank you so much. And if you're hearing this message, I want to say a huge thank you, because it means that you've listened to this entire episode. Of course, if you have any questions about the things that we covered in this episode, or want to know more about me or my other projects, you can find me on YouTube and Instagram at The Pregnancy Process.